My name is Esther Williams, and I am 58 years old. The years have carved themselves deep into my face, each wrinkle a testimony to suffering I should never have endured. Today, as I sit in this modest room with sunlight streaming through the window, I still sometimes forget that I am free. My hands shake when I write these words, not from age, but from the weight of memories that refuse to fade. This is my story, a story I must tell before time steals my voice forever. I was born in 1807 on a plantation in Virginia, into chains I did not choose. My mother, whose name was Ruth, held me for only 3 days before she was sold away. I learned this from old Mary, the woman who raised me in the quarters. She told me my mother sang to me those 3 nights, her voice breaking with each lullaby, knowing our time together was measured in hours. I have no memory of her face, only the echo of a song I cannot quite remember. The plantation where I spent my childhood belonged to a man named Thomas Ridgway. His house stood white and proud on the hill, surrounded by magnolia trees that bloomed every spring, their sweet scent mixing with the bitter smell of our suffering. I worked in those fields from the time I could walk, my small hands learning to pick cotton before they learned to write my own name. The overseer's whip taught us efficiency, the sun taught us endurance, and fear taught us everything else. When I turned 16, everything changed. Master Ridgway's son, Jonathan, returned from his studies up north. He was 23, tall and cold-eyed, with a cruelty that surpassed even his father's. He watched us in the fields with the calculating gaze of someone appraising livestock. Within a week of his return, he pointed at me during the evening count. "That one," he said. "Bring her to the main house." My heart stopped. Old Mary gripped my hand so tight I felt my bones grinding together. We both knew what happened to young women brought to the main house. Some came back changed, hollow-eyed and silent. Others never came back at all. That night, as I was led up the path to that White House, I prayed to a God I was not sure was listening. The autumn air was cool against my skin, and I remember thinking how beautiful the stars looked, wondering if it would be the last time I would see them. Jonathan Ridgway had other plans for me, though, plans that were somehow worse than what I had feared. He did not want me in the house. He wanted me hidden away, a secret kept in darkness. The cellar beneath the kitchen became my prison. It was a space perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet, with stone walls that wept moisture and a ceiling so low I could not stand fully upright. A single narrow window near the ceiling let in slivers of light during the day, though iron bars made sure I could never reach it. "You will work down here," Jonathan told me that first night, his voice echoing off the stone. "You will stay down here. You will not speak to anyone. You will not be seen by anyone, and you will be grateful for the mercy I am showing you." He gestured to a corner where a thin blanket lay on the dirt floor. "The alternative is much worse, I assure you." I did not understand then what he meant. I would learn, slowly and painfully, over the years that followed. The cellar was not just a workplace. It was a laboratory for his experiments in absolute control. He wanted to see how far he could break a human spirit, how much a person could endure before they ceased being a person at all. My days began before dawn, when he would unlock the heavy wooden door at the top of the stone stairs. He would descend with a lantern, the light harsh after hours of darkness, and give me my instructions. I washed his clothes in a wooden tub, using water he brought down in buckets. I mended his shirts by candlelight until my eyes burned. I prepared meals on a small iron stove he had installed, cooking food I was rarely allowed to eat myself. When I finished one task, there was always another waiting. But the work was not the worst part. The worst part was the isolation. Days would pass without hearing a human voice other than his barked commands. I could hear life happening above me. Footsteps crossing the kitchen floor, muffled conversations, laughter at dinner parties. But I was separated from it all by stone and wood and iron locks. Sometimes I pressed my ear to the floorboards, desperate for any connection to the world I had been stolen from. I lost track of time in that cellar. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. I marked the passing seasons only by the temperature changes that seeped through the stone walls, the bitter cold of winter that made my fingers too stiff to sew, the suffocating heat of summer that turned the cellar into an airless tomb. The narrow window showed me fragments of the world. A square of blue sky, falling snow, autumn leaves drifting past. Jonathan came and went according to no pattern I could discern. Sometimes he appeared 3 times in a day. Other times I would see no one for days on end, left alone with only the rats and the darkness. He brought me food, usually scraps from the main house, sometimes stale bread and water, but never enough. I grew thin, my body consuming itself for sustenance. The psychological torture was carefully calculated. He would tell me that everyone I knew had forgotten about me, that old Mary had died, that the other enslaved people thought I had run away. "You are nothing," he would say, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "You exist only because I allow it. You could disappear tomorrow and no one would notice or care." I tried to hold on to myself in that darkness. I sang the songs my mother had supposedly sung to me, making up the words I could not remember. I recited the prayers old Mary had taught me. I counted the stones in the walls, over and over, giving each one a name. Anything to keep my mind from fracturing under the weight of isolation and despair. There were moments when I considered ending my own suffering. The thought would creep in during the darkest hours, whispering that peace lay just beyond the veil of life. But something stubborn in me refused. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps it was rage, a burning anger that sustained me when nothing else could. I would not give him the satisfaction of destroying me completely. Years passed. I cannot tell you how many. 5, perhaps 6. Time lost all meaning in that eternal twilight. My body adapted to the darkness. My eyes grew sensitive to the faintest light. My back curved from constant stooping under the low ceiling. My hands became calloused and scarred from endless labor. But my spirit, though battered and bent, refused to break entirely. It was during my 6th year in the cellar, or perhaps my 7th, I truly could not be certain, when the first crack appeared in my prison. Not a physical crack, but something far more dangerous to Jonathan Ridgway's carefully constructed world of control. The arrival of another human being who saw me as human. Her name was Clara, and she came to work in the main house as a cook. I heard her voice first, filtering down through the floorboards above me. It was different from the other voices I had heard over the years, warmer, infused with a strength that suggested she had not yet been completely beaten down by this place. She hummed while she worked, old hymns that stirred memories I thought I had lost. I did not know she knew about me until the day a small piece of cornbread appeared on the floor near the cellar door. I stared at it for a long time, afraid it was a trap, another one of Jonathan's psychological games. But hunger eventually overcame caution, and when I picked it up, I found a tiny scrap of paper wrapped inside. On it, in careful letters, were 3 words: "You not alone." My hands trembled as I clutched that paper to my chest. Those 3 words were more nourishment than any food could provide. Someone knew I existed. Someone cared. Clara was careful, so careful. Small offerings would appear when Jonathan was away. A piece of fruit, a heel of bread, once even a small candle, and always the notes. "Hold on. God sees. You matter." Each one was a lifeline thrown into my darkness. It took 3 months before I actually saw her face. She had learned Jonathan's patterns, knew when he traveled to Richmond on business. One afternoon when the house was quiet, I heard the key turning in the lock at the top of the stairs. I pressed myself into the corner, terrified, but it was not his footsteps descending. It was hers, lighter and quicker. She was younger than I had imagined, perhaps 30 years old, with kind eyes that filled with tears when she saw me fully for the first time. I must have looked like something barely human, filthy, emaciated, my hair matted and my dress in rags. But she did not recoil. Instead, she crossed the space between us and took my hands in hers. "My God," she whispered. "My God, what has he done to you?" I could not speak. It had been so long since anyone had touched me with gentleness that I did not know how to respond. I simply wept, great shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside, a grief I had kept locked away for years. Clara visited me whenever she could, always watching for opportunities when the risk was lowest. She brought me real food, not scraps, but portions from her own meals. She brought clean water for washing. She brought news of the outside world, telling me about the other people on the plantation, about changes happening in the country, about something called abolition that was gaining strength in the North. "There are people fighting for us, Esther," she told me one afternoon, her voice low and urgent. "People who believe this whole evil system must end." Frederick Douglass, have you heard of him? He escaped slavery, and now he speaks across the country, telling our stories. Things are changing, slowly, but they are changing. I wanted to believe her, but hope felt dangerous. Hope was a luxury I could not afford in my stone cage. Yet despite my efforts to protect myself, her words planted seeds that began to grow. Clara taught me to read during those stolen moments. She smuggled down a primer meant for children, and by candlelight, while I should have been sleeping, I traced letters with my finger and sounded out words. "Freedom," I read. "Liberty," "justice." The words felt foreign on my tongue, like a language from a country I had never visited, but our secret could not last forever. Jonathan was paranoid and watchful, and Clara, despite her caution, eventually made a mistake. She had brought me a bowl of warm soup one winter evening, staying longer than usual because I had fallen ill with a fever. She was so focused on tending to me that she did not hear his footsteps above, did not hear him return early from town. The cellar door flew open and his voice boomed down the stairs. "Clara, what the hell are you doing down there?" She froze, the bowl still in her hands. Our eyes met for one terrible moment, and I saw her making a decision. Instead of cowering, instead of begging, she straightened her spine and faced him as he descended the stairs. "I am caring for a sick woman," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. As any Christian would do, his face contorted with rage. In 2 strides, he crossed the cellar and struck her across the face so hard she fell to the ground, the soup spilling across the dirt floor. I screamed, the first loud sound I had made in years, and tried to move toward her, but he blocked my path. "You dare," he hissed at Clara. "You dare interfere with my property? You dare defy my explicit orders?" "She is not property," Clara said, blood running from her split lip. "She is a human being, and what you are doing to her is an abomination before God." I had never heard anyone speak to a white man that way. The boldness of it, the sheer defiant courage, took my breath away. But I also knew what it would cost her. Jonathan grabbed Clara by her arm and dragged her toward the stairs. "You are finished here," he snarled. "I will see you sold south before the week is out. Let us see how brave you are picking cotton in Mississippi." As he hauled her up the stairs, Clara looked back at me one last time. Her mouth formed words I could not hear over Jonathan's shouting, but I could read her lips. "Do not give up." Then she was gone. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked, and I was alone again in the darkness, the spilled soup soaking into the earth floor like spilled blood. The days after Clara's removal were the darkest I had ever experienced. Jonathan did not come to the cellar for nearly a week, leaving me without food or water. I survived by licking moisture from the stone walls and eating the raw vegetables I had been given before to prepare. I weakened rapidly, my fever returning worse than before, and I drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by dreams of my mother's face, of Clara's courage, of freedom I would never taste. But Clara had left me one final gift, though I did not discover it until much later. Hidden beneath the thin blanket in my corner, pressed into a crack in the stone wall, was a small iron nail, perhaps 2 inches long, with a bent head. Nothing special, just a common nail that might have fallen from someone's pocket. But in that cellar, in my circumstances, it was a key. I stared at that nail for hours after I found it, turning it over in my hands, feeling its weight. An idea began to form in my fever-addled mind. Desperate, dangerous, but possible. The lock on the cellar door was old, simple. I had watched Jonathan turn the key countless times, had heard the mechanism click. If I could reach it, if I could manipulate it just right. It took me 2 months to work up the courage to try. 2 months of studying the door, of practicing with the nail in the darkness, of mentally preparing myself for what would happen if I failed. Jonathan would kill me. Of that I had no doubt. But staying in this cellar was a death sentence anyway, just a slower one. At least trying gave me a chance, however small. The night I decided to attempt my escape, There was a terrible storm. Thunder shook the house, and rain pounded against the small window. I could hear the household in chaos above me, people running to close shutters and move furniture away from leaking spots. In the confusion, I hoped my actions might go unnoticed just long enough. My hands shook as I climbed the stairs to the door. I had to stand on the top step and reach above my head to access the lock, my muscles screaming from the awkward position. I inserted the nail into the keyhole, feeling for the mechanism inside. Nothing. I tried again, adjusting the angle. Still nothing. An hour passed. Then 2. My arms burned with exhaustion, and my fingers were bleeding from where the nail had slipped and cut me. Despair began to creep in. Perhaps this had been a foolish dream all along. Perhaps I was meant to die in this cellar. But then, just as I was about to give up, I felt something shift inside the lock. A tiny movement, barely perceptible. I held my breath and applied gentle pressure. The nail caught on something. I turned it carefully, so carefully, and heard the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, the soft click of tumblers falling into place. The door opened. I stood at the threshold between captivity and possibility, my hand gripping the cellar doorframe so tightly my knuckles ached. The kitchen was dark except for occasional flashes of lightning through the windows, but after years in the cellar's gloom, even this seemed bright. My legs trembled beneath me, partly from fear, partly because they had forgotten what it meant to stand fully upright, partly because I was about to step into a world that had continued without me for so long. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the house and rain hammering the roof. It was both my greatest obstacle and my greatest ally. The noise would cover any sounds I made, but the weather itself could kill me if I was not careful. I had no plan beyond escape, no destination in mind, no knowledge of what lay beyond the plantation boundaries. I only knew I could not stay another moment in that cellar. I crept across the kitchen floor, my bare feet silent on the wooden boards. Every shadow seemed to hide Jonathan. Every creak of the house made my heart stutter with terror. On the table, I found a half-eaten loaf of bread, and I grabbed it, stuffing pieces into my mouth with desperate hunger. There was a coat hanging by the door, a woman's coat probably belonging to one of the house staff, and I took it, along with a pair of boots that were too large but better than nothing. The back door was unlocked. Why would they lock it? No one imagined anyone inside the house needed to be contained. I was a secret buried in the foundations, not a threat that required securing doors. This assumption, this arrogance, was my advantage. I slipped outside into the storm. The rain hit me like a physical force, instantly soaking through my thin dress despite the coat. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the plantation in stark white flashes. The main house behind me, the quarters far to my left, the fields stretching endlessly ahead, and beyond them, the dark mass of the forest. I ran, not with any grace or skill, but with the desperate, stumbling gait of someone whose muscles had atrophied from years of confinement. Every step sent pain shooting through my legs. My lungs burned in the cool air. But terror drove me forward, and beneath the terror was something else. A savage joy at being outside, at feeling rain on my face, at moving freely through space. The quarters were dark, everyone sheltering from the storm. I thought briefly of trying to find old Mary, to see if she still lived, to say goodbye if she did. But that would endanger her, and delay could mean capture. So I ran past them, toward the fields, toward the forest, toward whatever lay beyond. The cotton plants whipped in the wind, their leaves cutting at my arms as I pushed through them. Mud sucked at my boots, trying to pull me down. Twice I fell, landing hard in the churned earth, and twice I forced myself back up. Behind me, the house grew smaller, its lights dimming in the rain. No alarms yet, no dogs. Maybe they had not discovered my absence. Maybe I had more time than I thought. The forest edge appeared before me like a wall of darkness. To enter meant leaving behind everything I had ever known, even the terrible familiarity of the plantation. To enter meant committing fully to this desperate gamble with my life. I did not hesitate. I plunged into the trees, and immediately the storm's fury lessened. The canopy overhead blocked some of the rain, though water still dripped from every branch and leaf. I kept moving, no longer running, but walking as quickly as my exhausted body would allow. I had no idea which direction to go. North meant freedom, but which way was north? The storm clouds obscured the stars. Everything looked the same in the darkness. Trees and more trees, undergrowth grabbing at my legs, roots threatening to trip me with every step. As dawn began to break, the storm finally passed, leaving the world dripping and fresh. I found myself in a small clearing beside a swollen creek. My body was shutting down, demanding rest I could not afford to give. But I collapsed beside the water anyway, too exhausted to take another step. I do not know how long I lay there, minutes or hours. When I finally sat up, the sun was higher in the sky, sending dappled light through the trees. Birds sang. The normalcy of it felt strange after so long hearing only the sounds of my own breathing and the rats in the cellar. I drank from the creek, the cold water shocking my system, then ate more of the bread I had stolen. My mind began to work again, moving past blind panic to something resembling thought. They would be searching for me by now. Jonathan would be furious, would organize search parties, would offer rewards. I needed to move, to put distance between myself and the plantation. But which way? I sat beside that creek, a woman of 40-some years who knew almost nothing of the world beyond a few acres of cotton fields and a stone cellar, trying to make a decision that would determine whether I lived or died. It was then that I heard voices, male voices, distant but drawing closer. Dogs barked, my blood turned to ice. I forced myself to stand and waded into the creek. The cold water took my breath away, but I kept going, remembering something old Mary had told me long ago about how water confuses tracking dogs. I moved downstream, staying in the creek, using overhanging branches for support when the current grew strong. The voices grew louder. Tracks led to the creek, spread out along both banks. Can't have gotten far in her condition. I pressed myself against the far bank, partially hidden by roots and hanging vegetation. Through gaps in the leaves, I could see them. 3 white men with rifles and 2 enslaved men with the dogs. The animals strained at their leashes, barking frantically at the water's edge where I had entered. "She went in here," one of the men said. "Dogs lost the scent." "Clever," another replied. "More clever than Ridgway gave her credit for. Check both directions. She'll have to come out eventually." They split up, 2 going upstream, 3 going downstream toward where I hid. I sank lower in the water, only my nose and eyes above the surface, praying the shadows were dark enough to conceal me. My heart hammered so loudly, I was certain they must hear it. One of the enslaved men with the dogs came within 10 feet of my hiding spot. Our eyes met for a single, endless moment. He saw me. I know he saw me, crouched in the water like a terrified animal. His face revealed nothing. Then, deliberately, he turned away and called out, "Nothing down here. Creek's too high to track further." He saved my life. That man whose name I never learned, who was himself bound in chains, chose in that moment to let me go. I have thought about him often in the years since, wondered what punishment he might have faced if they discovered his deception, hoped that he too eventually found his way to freedom. The search party moved on. I waited in the creek until I could no longer hear their voices, then waited longer still, shivering violently as the cold water leached the heat from my body. Finally, when the sun was high overhead, I climbed out on the far bank and continued into the forest. For 3 days I walked, following the creek downstream because it seemed as good a direction as any. I ate berries and roots, drank from the stream, and slept in hollows beneath fallen trees. Twice more I heard search parties in the distance, and once I saw dogs, but each time I managed to hide until they passed. On the 4th day, I stumbled out of the forest onto a road. I stood there, swaying with exhaustion and hunger, unsure what to do. To stay hidden meant slow starvation. To reveal myself meant potential capture. While I stood paralyzed by indecision, a covered wagon came around the bend. The driver was a black man, older than me, with gray in his beard. Sitting beside him was a white woman, an impossible pairing that made no sense to my exhausted mind. The wagon slowed and stopped. "You running?" the man asked, his voice low and urgent. I could only nod. "Get in the back," he said. "Quick now, before someone sees." I did not question. I climbed into the wagon and found myself among sacks of grain and vegetables. The woman handed me a blanket and a piece of bread. "Cover yourself," she said gently. "We will get you somewhere safe." As the wagon began to move again, I lay hidden beneath the blanket, tears streaming down my face. I did not know who these people were or where they were taking me. They might be lying, might be turning me in for reward money. But in that moment, I chose to trust because I had no other choice left. The wagon journey lasted 3 days, though I lost precise track of time hidden beneath sacks of grain and old blankets. The man driving the wagon was named Thomas Freeman, and the white woman was his wife Hannah, a fact so extraordinary in Virginia in 1850 that I struggled to comprehend it. They were part of something they called the Underground Railroad, though Thomas explained it was neither underground nor a railroad, but rather a network of people helping enslaved individuals escape to freedom. "We are Quakers," Hannah told me during one of our brief stops in a secluded grove. "Our faith teaches that all people are equal before God, that slavery is an abomination. We cannot stand idle while such evil exists." They took me to a farmhouse 20 miles from Richmond, owned by a family named Patterson. The house had a false wall in the cellar, nothing like the cellar I had been imprisoned in, but rather a hiding space perhaps 4 feet deep, accessible through a cleverly concealed door in the pantry. 3 other people were already hidden there, a young couple named James and Sarah with their infant daughter. "You will stay here until the next conductor arrives," Thomas explained. "It could be days or weeks, depending on patrols and safety. The Pattersons will feed you and keep watch. If anyone comes searching, you must be absolutely silent in the hiding space, no matter what you hear outside. Lives depend on it, not just yours, but the lives of everyone in this network." Then he and Hannah left, heading back south to rescue others. I watched them go, with a mixture of gratitude and terror. These strangers had risked their lives for me, and I did not even know how to properly thank them. Life in the Patterson farmhouse fell into a strange routine. During daylight hours, we stayed hidden, speaking in whispers, hardly moving. Elizabeth Patterson, the wife, would bring meals, real meals, more food than I had seen in years. She was kind but practical, understanding that every moment we stayed increased her family's danger. "Federal law requires me to turn you in," she said matter-of-factly one evening as she brought down soup and bread. "The Fugitive Slave Act says I can be fined $1,000 and imprisoned for harboring you. My neighbors would call me a criminal, a traitor to Virginia." She paused, ladling soup into wooden bowls. "But there is a higher law than man's law, and I answer to it first." At night, when the household slept, we could speak more freely. James and Sarah told me their story, how they had escaped from a plantation in North Carolina after their master threatened to sell their baby daughter. Sarah was only 19, James 22, both of them terrified, but determined. "We are going to Canada," James said, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "There are communities of free Black people there, building lives, owning land. Can you imagine it, Esther? Owning land? Being truly free? I could not imagine it. The concept of freedom was still too abstract, too enormous to grasp, but I nodded and let their hope warm me like a fire. Sarah asked me to tell my story, but I found I could not. The words stuck in my throat, the memories too raw. "Maybe someday," I told her, "when I am further from it." On the 8th day, slave catchers came to the farm. We heard horses in the yard, loud voices demanding to search the property. Elizabeth's husband, Marcus, met them with cold politeness while we pressed ourselves into the hiding space behind the false wall, holding our breath, praying. Sarah's baby began to fuss. Sarah immediately covered the infant's mouth with her hand, terror in her eyes. The baby struggled, her little face reddening. James held Sarah, who was crying silently, still keeping her daughter quiet. I reached out and stroked the baby's head, humming so softly only she could hear, trying to calm her. We could hear the slave catchers overhead, boots thumping on the floor just above us, demanding to see the cellar. Marcus led them down the stairs. Through tiny cracks in the false wall, we could see lantern light, could hear them moving barrels and sacks, searching. "Nothing here," one of them finally said. "Just potatoes and preserves." "Told you," Marcus replied, his voice remarkably steady. "I run a farm, not a way station for runaways. Now, if you are finished, I have evening chores to attend to." The slave catchers left, but we stayed in the hiding space for another 3 hours, not daring to move until Elizabeth gave the signal that it was truly safe. When we finally emerged, cramped and shaking, Sarah collapsed, still clutching her daughter. The baby had a red mark across her mouth where Sarah's hand had pressed too hard in desperation. "I almost killed her," Sarah sobbed. "To keep her quiet, I almost killed my own baby." Elizabeth knelt beside her. "But you did not. She is alive. You are all alive. That is what matters." 2 days later, a black man named Samuel arrived with an ox cart full of hay. He was the next conductor. Under cover of darkness, he hid us beneath the hay. Me, James, Sarah, and the baby. And we began the next leg of our journey north. This portion of the escape was the most dangerous yet. We traveled through increasingly populated areas as we approached Washington. Slave catchers were everywhere, stopping wagons and demanding to inspect cargo. Samuel had papers claiming he was a freeman making deliveries, but papers could only protect him so far. We stopped at a safe house in Alexandria, then another in Baltimore. At each stop, I met more people involved in this underground railroad: black and white, Quakers and Methodists, and free people of color who risked everything to help strangers. Their courage astounded me. I had spent so many years believing I was utterly alone, that no one cared whether I lived or died. Yet here were dozens of people forming a human chain to pull me toward freedom. In Baltimore, we were joined by 6 more escapees, including a man in his 60s named Moses, who had been enslaved for 50 years. We were too many now to hide easily, so Samuel split us into 2 groups. Moses, the young family, and 2 others went with Samuel. I was placed with 2 young men named Robert and Daniel, under the care of a free black woman named Margaret, who lived in the city. Margaret's house was tiny, barely 2 rooms, but she opened it without hesitation. "I was enslaved too once," she told me as she prepared a meal. "I bought my freedom 20 years ago, saved every penny I could earn taking in laundry. When I finally held those manumission papers, I swore I would help others reach what I had reached. This is my purpose now." She also gave me something precious: information. Margaret had contacts throughout the free states, knew which cities had strong black communities, which places were hostile despite being technically free. "Pennsylvania is closest," she explained, spreading a hand-drawn map on the table. "But being in a free state does not mean you are safe. Slave catchers operate there too, kidnapping black people and dragging them south, whether they are actually escaped slaves or not. You need to get further north, New York, or better yet, Canada." "How much further?" I asked, struggling to understand the distances involved. "Canada is hundreds of miles from here. It will take weeks more of travel, and winter is coming." Margaret looked at me with concern. "Esther, I need to be honest with you. You are not well. The years you spent in that cellar have taken a toll. You need to rest, to regain strength." But I could not rest, not yet. Every day in one place was a day the slave catchers might catch up, a day Jonathan Ridgway might track me down. "I have to keep moving," I insisted. Margaret understood. 2 nights later, she secured passage for us on a ship heading up the Chesapeake Bay. The captain was sympathetic to abolitionist causes and occasionally smuggled escapees hidden among legitimate cargo. We would travel by water to Philadelphia, bypassing some of the most heavily patrolled roads. The night before we left, Margaret took my hands in hers. "When you are truly free," she said, "when you are safe, tell your story. Write it down or speak it aloud or paint it on walls. I do not care how you do it. But tell it. Let people know what was done to you, what is still being done to millions. This evil thrives in silence and shadow. Bring it into the light." I promised her I would, though I could not imagine anyone wanting to hear my story. What was I but one broken woman among millions? What did my suffering matter in the scope of such enormous evil? But Margaret gripped my hands tighter. "Every story matters, Esther. Every witness matters. You survived what was meant to destroy you. That itself is resistance. That itself is victory." The ship carrying us to Philadelphia was a cargo vessel named the Morning Star, which seemed a hopeful name for such a dangerous journey. Robert, Daniel, and I were hidden in the hold among barrels of salted fish and tobacco. The smell was overwhelming, and the ship's constant rocking made me violently ill, but we were moving north, always north, toward freedom. The voyage took 2 days. We dared not make any noise, so we communicated in gestures and whispers. Robert was 18, had been enslaved on a tobacco plantation in Maryland. Daniel was 23, a skilled carpenter whose master had hired him out to other plantations but kept all his earnings. They had escaped together after Daniel's master threatened to sell him south to cover gambling debts. "I built his house," Daniel told me, his voice bitter in the darkness of the hold. "Built it with these hands, every board and beam and door frame, made it beautiful, and he was going to sell me like I was nothing more than one of the hammers I used. Like my labor, my skill, my life meant less than his card game." We arrived in Philadelphia on a gray October morning. The captain, a weathered man named Sullivan, personally escorted us off the ship and through streets that bustled with more activity than I had ever witnessed. People everywhere, white and black, free and enslaved, immigrants speaking languages I did not recognize. The noise was overwhelming after so many years of silence. Sullivan brought us to a boarding house run by a free black couple, William and Harriet Johnson. Their home was already sheltering 4 other escapees, and I marveled at their courage in maintaining such a constant flow of fugitives through their doors. "Welcome to Philadelphia," Harriet said warmly, though I could see the strain in her eyes, the constant vigilance that came with this dangerous work. "You are in a free state now, but you are not yet safe. Slave catchers operate here openly, and the city police often help them rather than us. Stay inside, do not draw attention, and we will work on getting you further north." Philadelphia was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I saw black people walking freely through streets, conducting business, owning property. There was a vibrant community here, churches, schools, mutual aid societies. Yet beneath this surface of freedom was constant fear. The Fugitive Slave Act meant that no escaped person was truly safe anywhere in the United States. William Johnson explained the situation one evening as we ate dinner around his crowded table. "The law is designed to terrify us," he said. "Any black person can be accused of being a fugitive slave. We have no right to a jury trial, cannot testify in our own defense. A white man's word against ours is all it takes to condemn someone to slavery. Freeborn black people are kidnapped regularly and sold south. We live under siege." I had not understood the full horror of the Fugitive Slave Act until then. I had thought reaching a free state meant safety, but now I realized the tentacles of slavery stretched everywhere, that freedom in America was always provisional, always under threat. That night, I heard shouting outside. A slave catcher had cornered a young black man on the street, claiming he was an escaped slave from Virginia. A crowd gathered, free black citizens and white abolitionists, refusing to let the slave catcher take him. The police arrived, and the situation grew violent. I watched from behind curtained windows as people I did not know fought for a man they did not know, simply because it was right. The young man escaped in the chaos, but 3 of those who helped him were arrested, and the incident left everyone shaken. "It is getting worse," Harriet said quietly. "The southern states are pressuring the North to enforce the act more strictly. They cannot stand the idea of even a few thousand of us being free." Robert and Daniel decided to stay in Philadelphia. They had contacts here, people who could help them find work and establish themselves despite the dangers. I did not judge their choice. Everyone had to assess their own level of risk and make their own decision. But for me, Philadelphia did not feel far enough. Jonathan Ridgway's shadow still loomed too large. I needed more distance, more safety. "I want to go to Canada," I told William. "Whatever it takes, I need to get there." He nodded with understanding. "I will see what I can arrange. But Esther, I must be honest with you. The journey ahead is even more difficult than what you have already endured. It is late October now. In a few weeks, the snows will start. Travel becomes nearly impossible. You may need to wait until spring." The thought of waiting months terrified me, but I had no choice. William arranged for me to stay with a Quaker family outside the city, on a small farm where I could work and hide until spring travel became possible again. The family, the Bishops, were elderly and welcomed me as they had welcomed many others before me. Those winter months on the Bishop farm were strange. I was neither enslaved nor truly free, neither hidden nor fully visible. I helped with cooking and cleaning, mended clothes, tended the animals. Simple work, but I could stop when I was tired, could walk outside whenever I wished, could speak without fear of punishment. Small freedoms that felt enormous. Mary Bishop, the wife, was a patient teacher. She had been helping escaped slaves for 30 years and understood the peculiar trauma of transition. She did not push me to talk about my experiences, but was always available when I needed to. "You are mourning," she told me one evening as we sat by the fire, mending socks. "Not just for the years you lost, but for the person you might have been if this had not been done to you. That mourning is necessary. Do not rush it." She also taught me more reading and writing, building on what Clara had started. By the time winter ended, I could read simple texts and write my own name in clear letters. These skills felt like armor against a world that had tried to make me nothing. In March, as the snow melted and the roads became passable again, a message came from William Johnson. A conductor was heading to upstate New York and could take me along. From there, I could cross into Canada. I said goodbye to the Bishops with genuine sadness. They had given me not just shelter, but a glimpse of what humanity could be. People of different races choosing to see each other as family, to risk everything for strangers based solely on the principle that all people deserved freedom. "Go," Mary Bishop said, embracing me at the door. "Go and build a life, and someday, when it is safe, come back and visit us. I want to hear about the woman you become." The conductor was a man named John Fairfield, a white Southerner who had turned against slavery and dedicated his life to smuggling people north. He was flamboyant and reckless, posing as a slave trader traveling with his property to sell in New York. The disguise was both brilliant and terrifying. "Trust me," he said with a grin that did not entirely reassure me. "I have been doing this for 10 years. I know how these slave catchers think. I know how to talk to them." We traveled in a wagon with 6 other escapees, all of us playing the role of enslaved people being transported north. John Fairfield played his part perfectly. Loud, crude, treating us with casual cruelty whenever anyone was watching. When we stopped at taverns for food and rest, he would boast to other white travelers about the prices he expected to get for us in New York. It was sickening, even knowing it was an act. The performance required us to embody the very degradation we were fleeing, to play docile and submissive while everything inside us screamed to resist. But it worked. We passed through checkpoint after checkpoint without serious challenge. We reached Rochester, New York in early April. The city was a center of abolitionist activity, home to Frederick Douglass himself, whose newspaper, The North Star, had inspired so many. John Fairfield brought us to a house where we could rest before making the final crossing into Canada. "This is it," he told us. "Tomorrow night, you will cross the Niagara River. You will be in Canada, under British law. No Fugitive Slave Act, no slave catchers. True freedom." I could not sleep that night. After everything, the years in the cellar, the escape, the hundreds of miles traveled, I was one day away from freedom. It seemed impossible, like a dream I might wake from at any moment. But when morning came, I was still there, still moving forward, still alive. The crossing into Canada took place on a cold April night, the kind where your breath forms clouds and the wind cuts through every layer of clothing. We traveled in a small boat across the Niagara River, our guide a middle-aged black man named Harrison, who had made this crossing dozens of times. "See those lights?" Harrison pointed to the far shore. "That is Canada, British territory. Slavery is illegal there. Once your feet touch that ground, you are free, truly free." 7 of us huddled in that boat, me and 6 others who had survived similar journeys of escape. The river was choppy, spray soaking us as Harrison worked the oars. Behind us, America receded. Ahead, Canada waited. When the boat scraped against the Canadian shore, I did not move immediately. The others climbed out, some of them weeping, some falling to their knees and kissing the ground. But I sat frozen, unable to process what this moment meant. For 43 years, I had been enslaved. For the last 6 of those years, I had been buried alive in a cellar, forgotten and tortured. I had escaped, had traveled hundreds of miles through constant danger, had depended on the courage of dozens of strangers risking everything to help me. And now it was done. I was free. Harrison offered me his hand. "Come on, Esther," he said gently. "Welcome to Canada." I took his hand and stepped onto Canadian soil. My legs nearly gave out, and Harrison caught me. "I know," he whispered. "I know. I felt the same when I crossed 12 years ago. Give yourself time. Freedom is not just a place. It is something you have to learn how to carry." The town was called St. Catharines, a small community with a growing population of formerly enslaved people who had made the same journey. Harrison brought us to a church where Reverend Joshua Mason, himself an escaped slave from Kentucky, ran a resettlement program. "You are safe here," Reverend Mason told us as we crowded into the church's warm interior. "We will help you find housing, work, and community. But I will not lie to you. Freedom is not easy. You will carry the weight of what was done to you. Some days that weight will feel unbearable, but you are not alone in carrying it. We are all here. We all understand. And we will help each other." The first weeks in Canada were disorienting. I had to learn how to exist in the world again, to make decisions for myself, to speak without fear. Simple things, like walking down a street or entering a shop, required enormous courage. I jumped at loud noises. I could not sleep in enclosed rooms, the feeling of walls too close triggering panic. I hoarded food, unable to trust that more would be available tomorrow. Reverend Mason connected me with a family who needed help with their boarding house. Samuel and Ruth Wilson were former slaves themselves, had been free for 8 years, and understood the particular challenges of adjustment. They gave me a small room with a window I could open, that I could look through whenever I wished. That window became my anchor to reality. Ruth Wilson was patient with my limitations. When I had nightmares and woke screaming, she would sit with me until dawn. When I could not bear to go into the cellar to retrieve preserves, she went instead without making me feel ashamed. When I struggled to look white customers in the eye, assuming they would hurt me, she gently coached me on how to navigate these interactions in freedom. "They cannot hurt you here," she would remind me. "The law protects you now. You have rights. You can say no. You can walk away." These concepts were revolutionary. Rights, protection, choice. I had lived my entire life without them, and now I had to rewire my mind to understand them. I began attending the weekly gatherings at Reverend Mason's church, where formerly enslaved people shared their stories and supported each other. I learned I was far from alone in my struggles. Others had nightmares, flashbacks, crushing grief for loved ones left behind. Some had been free for years but still felt enslaved in their minds. We helped each other bear the unbearable. In one of these gatherings, a year after my arrival, I finally spoke about my time in the cellar. The words came haltingly at first, then in a flood I could not stop. I told them everything. The isolation, the darkness, the slow erosion of my humanity, Jonathan Ridgway's calculated cruelty, and Clara's courage that had saved me. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a woman named Sarah, not the Sarah I had traveled with, but another survivor, stood and embraced me. "You are here," she said simply. "After all that, you are here. That is victory." Her words planted something in me. I began to think about Margaret's challenge, her insistence that I tell my story. But I struggled with why anyone would care about one woman's suffering when millions remained enslaved. It was Frederick Douglass himself who answered this question. He came to St. Catharines in 1853 to speak, and Reverend Mason introduced me to him afterwards. I was terrified to meet this legendary man, but he spoke to me with genuine interest and kindness. "Your story matters because it is specific," he told me when I expressed my doubts. "Numbers are abstract. People cannot grasp the suffering of millions. But one woman, trapped for years in a cellar, surviving through courage and the kindness of strangers, that is something people can understand. That is something that can change hearts." His words gave me permission to believe my experience mattered. With Ruth Wilson's help, I began writing down my story. It took 3 years to complete. I was not a skilled writer, and reliving the trauma was excruciating. But I persisted, driven by the memory of everyone who had helped me escape, all the people still trapped in slavery who needed witnesses to their suffering. My narrative was published in 1856 by an abolitionist press in Toronto. It was not a bestseller like Frederick Douglass's autobiography or Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave, but it reached people. I received letters from readers, some moved to action, some wanting to help the cause, some sharing their own stories of survival. One letter I treasured above all others. It was from Clara. Somehow she had escaped Virginia and made her way to Philadelphia, where she saw my narrative in an abolitionist bookshop. She wrote to tell me she was free, working as a cook, and that she thought of me often. "I am so proud of you, Esther," her letter said. "You did not let him destroy you. You survived, you escaped, and now you are telling truth to power. That is the most radical act of all." I never saw Clara again. She died from pneumonia 2 years later, but knowing she had found freedom before her death brought me peace. Life in St. Catharines settled into a rhythm. I continued working at the Wilson boarding house, eventually saving enough to rent my own small cottage. I never married. The trauma of my experiences made intimacy impossible, but I built a chosen family among the community